Laughter erupted across the opulent ballroom, a suffocating wave of mockery that rebounded off the gilded walls and sparkling chandeliers. The guests, draped in designer gowns, black tie suits, carefully maintained facades, let loose a cruel, unanimous bark of amusement that tingled in my ears. These words, in giant block letters, glowed on the screen behind my sister, Dilwyn, a triumphant smirk tilting her glossy lips. She paused, savoring the hush as each new onlooker noticed me, stifling chuckles behind their hands. Hush, then more snickers. I stayed silent, seated at a table of people who barely looked my way, ignoring their sideways glances of pity and glee. Dilwyn, illuminated by a spotlight, let her silken voice drift into the microphone. "Don't laugh too hard," she purred, letting the last syllable hang. "She might start crying." The crowd roared louder. Glasses clinked. Muttered jabs floated among the polished audience, and somewhere, off to the side, my mother Martha sipped her wine with an expression so composed it bordered on bored. But I knew that face far too well. Beneath her veneer, I could see the subtle flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd wanted this. She wanted me subjected to that humiliating slideshow, each bullet point of my so-called failures hammered into the public consciousness. I felt the smooth glass of my untouched champagne flute press into my palm. I'd known something like this was coming, but the reality still stung. My father Bernard, in his crisp navy suit, leaned toward Andrew's father, whispering with unmasked glee. He hadn't just allowed this, he'd orchestrated it. He and Dilwyn had planned my public disgrace to coincide with their big social event. Because to them I was a spectacle, not a daughter. My muscles tensed, screaming at me to leap up, to throw the glass, to bellow across the room that they were the ones who should be ashamed. But I forced myself to be still. I inhaled a slow breath, letting the old indignities and fresh rage wash over me. I'd learned to withstand such humiliations. I had honed that skill since I was old enough to realize my family reveled in mocking me. My phone weighed heavily in my lap, its screen already glowing with readiness. Healing Hearts Live. My personal channel, home to more than 1 million followers. Each one a sympathetic ear waiting to hear my side. My father, mother, and sister had no idea I'd built such a fortress of support from the ground up. No inkling that the quiet, docile version of me they thought they still controlled had outgrown them. I glanced at the live feed. The rolling chat, comments popping up as watchers prepared for something big. They'd tuned in after I'd posted a cryptic announcement. "Tonight, I show them who I really am." And they were ready. While the laughter still vibrated through the room, I rose from my seat. The harsh overhead light caught on the shimmering detail of my navy gown. I felt the eyes of 100 guests pivot to me as I stood, ignoring their curious, taunting stares. Dilwyn's voice faltered for a moment. She gaped at me in surprise, then recovered with a cat-like grin. "Something wrong, Hillary?" she asked, the microphone capturing her sly tone. "You look a bit pale." I gazed up at her. Once, I would have cowered under that look, my sister's mocking, condescending smirk. But no more. "No, Dilwyn," I replied quietly. "But I think you will be." With a single tap, the laughter cut off like a spigot turned tight. The projector flickered. The words about my failures disappeared, replaced with a black screen that bore a white phrase in huge letters. "The truth about the Wilson family, live." A hush fell so abruptly that the rustling of taffeta and the clink of glassware sounded deafening. Eyes widened in confusion as a chat box materialized in the bottom corner, messages scrolling in real time. "What's going on? Is this some glitch?" "We're with you, Hillary, speak up." The hush deepened as, from the speakers, a small child's voice emerged. "Mom, why can't Hillary have kids?" The voice was Dilwyn's, recorded when she was perhaps 10 or 11, quavering with naive curiosity. A low, bitter chuckle followed in the audio. Then my mother's voice, speaking in a hush that was never meant to leave our family's walls. "Because she's broken, sweetheart. Just like her life." The audience froze. Martha's wineglass slipped from her grip, smashing on the marble floor. Bernard lurched to his feet, his carefully combed hair now seeming to bristle with panic. Dilwyn's eyes dilated, she stammered. Turn it off. Turn it. Her voice cracked. I lifted my phone so that the camera faced the crowd. Healing Hearts Live captured every stunned expression in the ballroom, from the nearest table's collective gape to the men at the back who were checking their own phones in confusion. In that moment, I felt years of pain shifting off my chest, replaced by a trembling sense of triumph. To everyone watching, I said, voice carrying across the hush, this is the Wilson family you never see. More voices flooded the feed. I believe you, Hillary. Stay strong, we support you. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone, not in front of them. Instead, they were the ones drowning in a sea of their own cruel words. But that was just the beginning. Weeks before, I'd received Dilwyn's wedding invitation in a lavish, cream-colored envelope, an embossed family crest, a gold satin ribbon, every detail singing of wealth and vanity. She'd included a handwritten note. Hope you can make it, and please don't bring up your divorce or your personal issues. Andrew's family is refined, and we want a pleasant day. Even as I read those words, bitterness coiled in my belly. Dilwyn wanted her marriage day uncontaminated by my supposed failures. She wanted to ensure I was just an accessory to her triumph, a scapegoat to highlight how perfect she was in comparison. But a bigger, deeper part of me recognized an opportunity, the chance to use everything I'd gathered against them. I placed the invitation on my kitchen counter, near the framed accolades that my family had never bothered to ask about. My advanced degree completed in night classes, the philanthropic awards for my non-profit foundation, Healing Hearts. In my father's eyes, I'd always be that high school dropout who never achieved anything. In my mother's eyes, I was the daughter who couldn't even keep a husband, who couldn't fulfill what they saw as a woman's primary purpose. In Dilwyn's eyes, I was the flawed older sister, a comedic cautionary tale. The reality was so far from the illusions they clung to. For years, I'd been quietly documenting each of their vicious remarks, every snide comment, every private conversation in which they scorned me for being infertile, for having a failed life. I'd recorded them with hidden devices, saved texts, emails, little humiliations that, stacked together, formed a mountain of evidence. I was no longer powerless. The next clip blasted from the speakers. Darius was smart to leave her. Men want kids, want to leave something behind. Hillary can't give anyone that. My father's voice, exuding arrogance, obviously recorded during some dinner with close friends. The crowd winced collectively at his callousness. My father, apparently having found his tongue, bellowed at the AV technician. Shut it down. Right now. But the tech just looked panicked, pressing buttons that had no effect. My remote commands overrode the system. Dilwyn, cheeks reddening, dropped her microphone with a metallic screech. Who do you think you are? She hissed at me, chest heaving under her wedding gown's intricate lace. You're ruining everything. I advanced closer to the dais. Everything. I echoed, letting my voice fill with calm disdain. You mean the carefully constructed lie that you and Andrew are the ideal couple, while I'm just some pitiful discard? I saw Andrew, perched uncomfortably on the edge of the groom's table, shifting in confusion. He'd heard rumors, probably, about me being some twisted, embarrassing older sister. But seeing it laid out like this, in black and white, had him rattled. The screen glitched again, showing an official medical report. In bold letters at the top, it displayed Dilwyn's name, her date of birth, and the diagnosis. I heard the crowd gasp. Some read it. Some recognized the terminology for a condition that made pregnancy impossible. How could you? Dilwyn's voice quavered, her eyes wild with panic. Ironic, isn't it? I said, stepping forward so she could see me clearly, that I've spent years being labeled the infertile one, the broken one, when you're the one with that genetic condition all along? Andrew's eyes flashed with anger, confusion, perhaps betrayal. Dilwyn, he said hoarsely, is this some kind of mistake? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her gaze darted from him to me, to the projection, to the outraged, whispering crowd. I saw tears gather at the edges of her meticulously lined eyes. Then came the final blow. The ballroom doors opened, and my ex-husband Darius entered. Heads whipped around, a ripple of new whispers stirring. My father's face contorted in fury. Clearly, he'd not expected Darius to come back. He walked straight to me, and I handed him the microphone that Dilwyn had let fall. He lifted it to his lips, scanning the silent, on-edge guests. "I never left Hillary because of her fertility," Darius said, voice steady but tinged with remorse. "I left because this family nearly destroyed her. They used emotional abuse so casually, it was like breathing for them." He shook his head. "I was a coward who ran, instead of trying to protect her. But I need you all to know the truth." A hush stretched across the hall, as if the entire place was holding its breath. Darius turned toward me, a sad apology in his eyes. "Hillary, I'm sorry. You deserved better than me." Something inside me loosened, a tension I'd carried for years. I pressed my lips tight, nodded, unable to form words. Then I cleared my throat, addressing the crowd and the live camera feed once more. "They called me broken for so long," I said. "Told me I was a disgrace because I got divorced, because I supposedly couldn't have children. But the real disgrace is how they treat people, how they thrive on humiliation." My gaze swept the audience, camera panning across their stunned faces. This is what real emotional abuse looks like. Messages flashed on my phone from Healing Hearts viewers. "Thank you for sharing this. I was told I was broken too. You're so brave, Hillary. Keep going." I inhaled, scanning the dais. My mother stared at me in horror, cheeks splotched red. Bernard still tried to bark orders, but no one listened. Dilwyn trembled, tears streaking her makeup, her fiancé practically recoiling from her. The ivory roses and gold decorations around them seemed tawdry now, overshadowed by the raw truth laid bare. I lifted my phone to record the final moments of their downfall. "The world knows now," I said softly, and with that, I turned and walked out of the ballroom. My footsteps echoed behind me, no one daring to stop me. In my chest, my heart pounded with exhilaration, anger, and, oddly, relief. The next morning I woke to endless buzzing. My phone glowed with thousands of notifications. Social media platforms exploded with coverage of the Wilson wedding scandal, dissecting the recordings, the documents, the meltdown. Healing Hearts soared to triple its usual traffic, comment after comment from survivors who identified with my story. I scrolled through messages. I was told I was worthless too. "You're an inspiration. Finally, these abusers are exposed." Midway through, I received an email from Jonathan, my attorney, with a note. "Incoming, cease and desist from your father. He's desperate." I opened the attached PDF. Bernard's legal attempt to silence me, claiming defamation, urging me to take down all evidence. I laughed bitterly, remembering how many times he'd tried to stifle me with intimidation. This time I had the upper hand. I typed a reply. "We're standing firm. Fight me if you want." Word spread that Andrew's family had cancelled the wedding. They released a statement. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, the engagement is dissolved." The tabloids reported Andrew left the city for a while, apparently to dodge the humiliation. Dilwyn, her reputation in tatters, holed up in her penthouse, refusing to speak to the press, ignoring frantic calls from friends who wanted the juicy inside scoop. Meanwhile, corporate sharks circled Bernard's real estate empire. Investigators discovered financial fraud, shady land deals, and misappropriation of funds. Within days, investors withdrew, board members resigned, and lawsuits stacked up like cordwood. My mother, who thrived on high society events, found herself blacklisted from galas and charity luncheons. She went from being the hostess of the year to the unwelcome outcast. First, it felt almost anticlimactic. I dreamed revenge would taste sweet, but witnessing it, I found a numbness creeping over me. Could they have become better people if they'd ever tried? Could I have lived a different life if they'd shown me kindness? Questions weighed on me, overshadowing the triumph. Still, I understood it had to be this way. For years, they'd branded me the family failure, used me as a scapegoat to keep themselves feeling superior. Exposing them was the only way I could break free, Not just physically but emotionally. From the belief that I was worthless, from the fear that I'd never escape their shadow. Healing Hearts soared to new heights as people rallied behind my story. I gave interviews not to tabloids, but to non-profits and mental health advocates who wanted to highlight emotional abuse and the importance of speaking up. The phrase, "Don't be silent anymore," became a rallying cry for thousands of survivors. Eventually, the media chatter began shifting to the next scandal. My father's name, once revered, now signified disgrace, but the world moves on quickly. He retreated into the background, apparently under investigation. My mother vanished from social circles. Dilwyn's social media accounts went dark. No more glitzy photos or quotes about #blessed, #perfect-family, #living my best life. I was left with a strange quiet. For the first time, no paternal phone calls to belittle me, no maternal sighs or sisterly barbs. There was only me in my modest apartment, waking up each morning to plan new outreach events for Healing Hearts, to schedule interviews for my memoir, Silent No More, where I detailed what it felt like to be systematically torn down by the ones who should have protected me. One afternoon, as I sipped coffee in our non-profit's bright, welcoming office, a woman at the front desk told me I had a visitor. I stepped out and saw Dilwyn, standing there in a simple sweater and jeans, no trace of the designer flair she once flaunted. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her shoulders slumped as though she were carrying an invisible weight. "Hillary," she said quietly, "could we talk?" Part of me wanted to slam the door. The image of her cackling at that wedding, humiliating me yet again, was still fresh. But I remembered what my work at Healing Hearts taught me, that sometimes the lines between victim and abuser can blur, that acknowledging pain is the first step to real change. So I let her inside. She peered around the office, glancing at posters about emotional well-being, pictures from workshops, letters pinned to corkboards from survivors. "This is what you do now?" she asked in a hushed tone, awe creeping into her voice. "Yes," I said, arms folded. "I help people who went through experiences like mine." She swallowed, eyes wet. "I read your book." I stiffened slightly. Silent No More laid bare every scar, every betrayal. And, yes, it was powerful, she admitted, tears gathering. She sank into a nearby chair, looking suddenly younger, almost fragile. "I lost Andrew, my status, everything. Now, I realize I don't actually know who I am without Dad telling me what to do, without Mom praising me for being perfect." I studied her, torn between anger and sympathy. For so long, she'd been the instrument of my pain. But maybe, just maybe, she too had been shaped by the cruelty above her, manipulated into believing she had to climb the social ladder at all costs. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Hillary." I pressed my palms against the sides of my arms, breath catching. 2 words I never thought I'd hear from her. "It doesn't fix what you did," I said, my voice neither harsh nor gentle, just matter of fact. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a button you press." She nodded, tears slipping free. "I know. I can't live like them anymore. I can't live like that." I sighed, feeling a complicated swirl of empathy. "If you want to change," I said carefully, "it's going to take a lot more than just apologies. You have to unlearn everything they taught you." She nodded vigorously, eyes shining with raw desperation. "I'm willing. I don't have anything else." I stood there in silence, thinking of all the ways she'd hurt me, and also how lonely the world can become when your illusions crumble. Finally, I offered a tentative hand. "We can talk. But it's going to be on my terms." She nodded, grasping my hand briefly. The small contact felt like the first step on an uncertain path. Maybe we'd never be real sisters as society defines it, but if she was sincere, perhaps she could salvage something of herself. Time passed, and healing continued. People asked me if I regretted exposing them so publicly. I told them the only regret I had was that it took me so long. Over and over, survivors came up to me, at book signings, at Healing Hearts events, and thanked me for giving them courage to speak up, to leave toxic homes or relationships, to find help. The meltdown at that wedding became more than a personal act of vengeance. It grew into a symbol for others who felt voiceless under abusive families. At one crowded bookstore signing, a young woman with trembling hands pushed my memoir toward me. "Your story saved me," she whispered. "When I saw how you stood up for yourself, I realized I could too." Emotion surged in my chest as I scribbled a message in her book. "Your voice has power. Never let anyone take it away." She left with tears in her eyes, and I realized that was what truly mattered now. Not that my old family name lay in ruins, but that by telling my truth, I'd managed to pull others from the edge of despair. Eventually the headlines moved on. Bernard Wilson's empire crumbled thoroughly under indictments and lawsuits, and he drifted into obscurity. Martha was last seen living in a modest condo, far from her old elite social set. Dilwyn came to see me occasionally, volunteering for small tasks at Healing Hearts, trying to rebuild a sense of self outside her father's shadow. She still had a long way to go, and I reminded her that trust wasn't easy to regain. But she stayed, even when it was difficult, which told me something. Maybe in tearing down the illusions, I'd given her a chance to become a real person. One breezy afternoon, I walked through the city park, phone in hand, reading updates from the foundation. Our newest outreach had launched, a program for young adults who'd aged out of toxic foster homes or abusive families. I breathed in the crisp air, remembering how small I'd once felt, how powerless. Now I was free, forging my own path. My own sense of happiness filled me. Happiness that wasn't about overshadowing anyone else or meeting some unattainable standard, but about living a life that was mine. Without shame. Without fear. My phone buzzed with a message from a longtime follower. I just confronted my parents about how they treated me, and they said they never realized how cruel it was. "Thank you for inspiring me." I exhaled, a soft smile touching my lips. Yes, the Wilson family name was forever stained, but from those ashes, I'd built a platform that gave thousands a voice. A small price to pay for a life unburdened by their cruelty. People often ask, what's better, walking away quietly or exposing the abusers to the world? My answer is that each journey is personal. For me, I needed the world to see. I needed to reclaim the narrative they twisted for so long. Exposing them wasn't just about revenge. It was about setting the record straight, about telling every other Hillary out there that they could break free from the lies. In the end, I found a life that they never believed I could have. One filled with purpose, forged by my own strength. That's the real happy ending. Not that I crushed them under my heel, but that I emerged from their shadow, finally unashamed of who I was. Because for all the times they called me infertile, called me a failure, I discovered I could give birth to something far more powerful. A movement, a voice, an undeniable truth. And that truth gave me the freedom to let go of them, to let them crumble under the weight of their own deceit, and to walk onward, carrying nothing but a future that I'd carved for myself. Yes, I chose to confront them. Yes, it was messy, dramatic, painful. But if I had to do it over again, I would. Because some secrets need to be shattered in the most public way possible, leaving no room for them to hide or for me to ever doubt my worth again. I found my happy ending in the echo of their downfall and in the quiet dawn that followed, where my voice rang loud and clear for anyone who'd ever been told they were broken. I showed them that broken pieces can be reassembled into something even stronger, something defiant and radiant in its truth. And that, in the end, was all the vindication I needed.